Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. Today I figured I would just make a quick video going over what I would recommend for Stormweaver players as you get early on into the endgame, what build is going to suit you so that you can just start blasting maps very early on, and I also wanted to show you guys the setup that I have been having success with right now. I don't know that this is necessarily going to be like a huge in-depth build guide because I don't think what I have set up is like the absolute best build that you can possibly run on this character, but I have been having a lot of success with it. At this point, I can do T9, T10 maps without pretty much any risk of failure. The damage seems to be really good, and I'm excited to try out a lot of the ideas that I have, but I'm kind of changing stuff pretty much on like a by-hour basis. Like every couple hours, I'm changing stuff in this skill tree all the time, so this isn't going to be a very in-depth guide. I'm kind of just going to go over what I think you guys should use as you get early on to the end game and show you what I'm using currently and kind of just go over where I'm at in my build and a lot of the things that are kind of floating around in my brain. Before I get into the video, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor, World & Warfare Economics. World & Warfare is an immersive, complex, grand real-time strategy game / geopolitical sim where you can control any country in the world, wage massive wars, and also manage every detail of entire economies and militaries. You can explore the vast terrestrial boundaries of space, take control of literally any nation you please, immerse yourself entirely in multifaceted gameplay where every decision that you make has long-term consequences and hefty implications. One of my favorite parts about the game is that the game is actually a full sandbox, allowing you to get really creative and do pretty much whatever you want, with the game having zero scripted outcomes, so your world is going to be completely unique to you. Not only that, the game also comes with extensive modding tools allowing players to pretty much customize their gaming experience to perfectly mold your own world around your preferences. Currently, World & Warfare is in early access, but the full launch is going to be on December 20th, and you don't want to miss it. You can download it using my link in the description, and a big thanks to World & Warfare for sponsoring today's video. If you haven't seen my leveling video, I would recommend checking that out if you are trying to level up as Stormweaver. Spark is going to be your best bet and also is extremely good into the late game. I also don't think that Spark has pretty much any risk of being nerfed, such as a lot of the other spells. It is not overtly overpowered, but it is extremely powerful, and it does not take very much gear investment. So as you're getting into the early end game, I'm just going to link this, which I have as a leveling build 53+. This is pretty easy to use while you're leveling, and then also when you get into like maps, you can use the exact same thing. It's basically just you're scaling up Spark's damage, arcane tempo for cast speed, acceleration for prod speed, control destruction so it just does more damage. You put the flame walls down, shoot through the flame wall so it does more damage. You use Orb of Storms with lightning exposure to just give you some exposure, and then you scale up your mana a little bit. Mana Tempest gives you a crazy just multiplicative damage increase. Put Inspiration on there so it costs less mana. Premeditation so it does more damage. Murderous Intent just so you have like a culling strike, or you can just use Lightning Warp as a culling strike. Conductivity is simply just a lightning resistance debuff. And then I actually put on Cast on Ignite for Enfeeble. Early on into maps, you're probably going to have survivability issues. So Cast on Ignite, oddly enough, instantly procs with Flame Wall. So you just put it down and it will pretty much just apply Enfeeble to any mob. I like this for leveling particularly because putting down the Enfeeble meant bosses will have a harder time just instantly one-shotting you with a lot of mechanics. So that is helpful, and having it kind of automated via the Flame Wall with Cast on Ignite is pretty nice. At some point, though, I did swap this around, and I actually tried out Cast on Ignite with Comet, and Comet spawned a lot. You guys have probably seen a lot of videos with Comet, and you'll probably see that in my gameplay, you have a lot of Comets flying down. However, I am still mainly using Spark as my damage, and this is still predominantly a Spark build. There's kind of two ways that you can go. One way, which is the way that I'm using, which I haven't seen other people do, so I don't know if it's necessarily ideal, but one way is that I'm converting my Spark into Frost. The reason that I decided to do this early on wasn't even to take advantage of Comet, but it was basically when I got early into maps, my resistances was absolute terrible, like crap. Like these were like 10% each. So if you're getting early into maps, I'd highly recommend just focusing entirely on getting resistances and getting survivability. Damage isn't a big deal because as long as you're surviving, you're going to clear the maps. But my resistances were terrible, and my Spark just wasn't doing as much output as I needed at that time. So what I really wanted was just the survivability layer of being able to instantly free stuff. So I picked up a Call of the Brotherhood Topaz Ring. At the time, I got this for 4 Exalted Orbs. Now it's probably around 7 or 8. Not that hard to farm Exalted Orbs if you guys want like a trading guide. I can make that, or you guys can just look that up online yourselves. But you just go on a trading website, buy yourself Call of the Brotherhood, and this is going to convert all lightning damage that you do to cold damage. So your build no longer scales with lightning damage, but that is perfectly fine. You can just scale your cold damage. You don't really lose much damage, and you still gain the benefit of like Mana Tempest and stuff like that. And then it basically just makes it to where, as you can see, your Spark instantaneously freezes mobs. So this solved the issue for me early into maps where I'm getting swarmed by mobs and I just die. This just makes it to where they instantly get frozen, so I don't have to deal with that, and it just gave me a ton of survivability. But then I thought, I had Comet on my Cast on Ignite, and then I thought, well, the mobs are getting frozen, let me just try Cast on Freeze Comet. I tried that, and then what ended up happening is that I didn't even need to do much more damage with my Spark anymore, because the Comets are kind of just one-shotting stuff with almost no investment into cold damage. But because I'm converting my lightning damage into cold damage, now I can scale my cold damage, which just so happens to also scale my Comet. So basically, I'm playing a Spark build where I'm still scaling the damage of Spark a lot, because scaling the damage of Spark is going to increase how much freeze I'm building up, and basically just make it to where I freeze and chill the mobs faster, I believe. Keep in mind, I am brand new to PoE, so I could be wrong on that, but the Spark damage is still there for bosses. The boss damage isn't like insane with my setup right now, but I'm not sacrificing all that much to get the Comets out, which basically just makes my mapping 10 times better. Alternatively, rather than using Call of the Brotherhood, you could still just go a full lightning build and just scale your Spark to the moon and take advantage of Archmage. Archmage is going to give you a massive amount of additional damage based on how much mana that you have. And right now I am scaling my mana quite a bit, and I would scale that even more if I were to use take advantage of Archmage. And then if you wanted that defensive layer of having everything be crowd controlled, you could use Kotoko's current jeweled gloves. This makes it to where lightning damage from your hits is going to apply electrocution, and electrocution pretty much just shocks the mobs. So it is effectively the same thing, but instead of using freeze, you're using electrocute. However, with Call of the Brotherhood, Comet just does a crap ton of damage with Cast on Freeze. So that is what I've been enjoying using. The thing is though, if I'm using Cast on Freeze, this costs 60 spirit, and Archmage costs 100 spirit. So I'm not gaining the benefit of like the massive increased damage with Archmage because I can't use both of these, but it is possible to use both of these if you get a chest with plus 60 spirit on it. Or I could ditch this amulet and get another amulet with spirit on it, like 30, and then get a chest with 30 spirit, and then that would enable me to use Archmage. But then my mana becomes a bit of an issue. This is something that I'm playing around with in my head, but I have not done that right now. But until you get Call of the Brotherhood, the build is extremely similar almost regardless. Basically, you try to just scale your lightning damage as much as you can, and then you use all the skills that I will recommend here. So first off, I'll talk about my support gems, then we'll talk about the skill tree and survivability and gear. So when it comes to my gems, I'm using Spark, of course, with Arcane Tempo for cast speed, Control Destruction so that it doesn't deal crits anymore, but it does 30% increased damage, which is really good. Acceleration for more projectile speed, and then with my 4-link, my 5-link, I am using Persistence for more duration. This makes it to where projectile speed basically makes it do more damage because it travels faster, and the duration will make it last longer. I have a little bit more duration than I need right now, I think. This is particularly only useful for bosses. I could spec out of some duration if I wanted to just do more damage while mapping, which I might do at this point because bosses are few and far in between, and I kill them pretty quickly anyways. I still have Flame Wall. I don't use it very often. Every once in a while on bosses, I'll put it down. If you wanted to, you could pair this with, if you had a little bit of more spirit, you could add Cast on Ignite or something. Or you could have some Ignite synergies in skill tree, but I almost never put this down. But if you're playing pure Spark, it's still good. It just increases the damage of your Spark. And then, of course, Cast on Freeze, you would just simply omit this if you are playing without Call of the Brotherhood. But Cast on Freeze, I have Comet. And then I have Spell Echo, which essentially just means you do double Comets. And then I have Impetus, so every time that I freeze, as you can see, my energy gain is 100. But then because of Arcane Tempo, that gives me an additional 40%. I don't know where the other 26% is coming from, to be honest. I don't think I have any in skill tree. But basically, every time I freeze, I get 166 energy, and it'll just instantly spawn out Comets. I believe that is how that works anyways. And then I have Inspiration. The biggest problem with Comet while adding it, or rather the downside of adding the Comet to your Spark build, is that Comet will, with the Cast on freeze, it costs a absolute crap ton of mana. So without having inspiration here, you run out of mana pretty regularly, and even with inspiration, because I'm spawning so many, because I'm freezing so regularly, mana is kind of an issue. I have spec'd out of a lot of mana regeneration, which I could spec into, and keep in mind, the more flat mana that you have, the more mana regeneration that you will be getting via your Arcane Surge here. So later on, that may be remedied with a little bit better gear, or just having like more skill tree points. But for now, this is pretty good, and I pretty much just slam my mana pots. Currently, with my other Spirit Gem, I am using Grim Feast. This is basically just so that I can have Clarity active all the time, and also this actually gives quite a lot of Energy Shield. Talk about Energy Shield in a bit, but if there's another Spirit Gem you want to use, feel free. Then I have Orb of Storms with Cold Exposure and Strip Away so that I just apply more Cold Exposure. It doesn't matter that this is a lightning skill, and this also, because all of my lightning damage is converted to cold, this will help with chill and freeze buildup on bosses. I pretty much only use it on bosses and elites for the exposure. I don't know of a good third support right now, so I don't have one. Lightning Warp I just use as a culling strike, and this literally does nothing. There's one that gives you mana, I think, when you cull an enemy. I almost never use it. I've been messing around with Frost Wall. This helps sometimes for like survivability. I kind of just slam it down so mobs can't run at me if I ever get surrounded. And if you blow it up, it does instantly freeze mobs, but you pretty much insta-freeze stuff with the spark anyway. Mana Tempest is very good for just doing extra damage. It does drain your mana almost instantaneously. You can see if I cast spells, my mana is just going to go down like crazy. And if you're spamming comets out, I do believe this does buff the comets, and your mana just goes bye-bye, but it does give you a lot of extra damage. And I have +1 levels to lightning skills, skills empowered, deal 15% more damage, and murderous intent. If there's another support that you guys think is better here, I guess my camera's in the way. Oh, or I can just do that. If there's another support you guys think that is better here, let me know, and I will consider that. Now that I've gone over skill gems, I want to talk about survivability and how you want to set up your gear and your defenses. Very early on into the end game, I would recommend just having like armor or evasion on almost every piece and trying to scale up your max life and making sure that you have resistances on all pieces and trying to cap out your resistances very early into maps. You'll see though, I have a lot of energy shield, and at some point I would recommend swapping over to energy shield entirely. And I don't even have that much energy shield. I don't have a crazy investment into it currently, but it is still way better than scaling life is going to be. You'll see that my life is only 1. That's because I am using Chaos Inoculation. When you play Energy Shield, you take double Chaos damage, and this makes it to where my HP goes to 1, but I am immune to Chaos damage. So I no longer need to scale my Chaos res. I'm basically just immune. And I'm not scaling life anymore. I'm scaling pure Energy Shield as much as possible. The question is, when should you swap to Energy Shield? I would say you should swap to Energy Shield once you have a like extra piece of gear that has Energy Shield on almost everything. The biggest thing is getting a chest with high Energy Shield. Mine isn't even that good. It's only 519. But once you can get a chest that is a pretty decent amount of Energy Shield, and then you can put 2 sockets on it to increase how much ES it has, and then your other bases are Energy Shield, that is probably when I would recommend swapping over to it. This amulet here, the Everlasting Gaze, makes my ES significantly higher. I'm already scaling mana as it is, so using this is just going to give me, right now, almost 2,000 flat ES. Not flat, but almost 2,000 ES. But this costs somewhere like 40 to 50 exalts, so you don't entirely need it in order to swap. I can't really tell you when you should swap over to Energy Shield. It's kind of just a matter of having the gear to be able to do so, and then once you do, you want to swap around your skill tree a little bit and invest into some Energy Shield. Right now, I'm not even invested into that much. Ideally, you want to invest into some Energy Shield recharge rate and stuff like that, but I mainly just went for maximum Energy Shield, and right now my recharge rate is not anything insane. I could sacrifice a little bit of damage to go for more Energy Shield recharge rate, which basically just makes the delay a little bit faster. Right now, my delay is pretty crap, like 111%, so it takes about 1.5 seconds for me to start regenning, and then while I'm regenning, it's about 1,400 per second. As I get more maximum Energy Shield, I would want to increase this number, and if I'm doing really hard content where I'm getting hit all the time, I would want to increase the modifier delay here so that it doesn't take as long to start recharging. Basically, the difference would be I would just add these nodes here for faster start, and then add these nodes, and then that would pretty much solve it all by itself. If you are, a couple things I want to go over with the skill tree. If you're not playing Energy Shield instead of taking any of these energy shield nodes that just give you maximum energy shield, you would go into these nodes instead, where percent of your damage is taken from mana before life. There's some here, and then there's also some right here, and that is very easy to path into. Another thing, if you are not playing cold damage, there's a few nodes that I would not spec into. So right here, I have increased cold damage and freeze buildup, cold damage, and instead I would just go for lightning damage, right? Another thing is I went here, which I quite like, increase elemental damage if you chilled an enemy. I am chilling constantly, and I'm also shocking enemies, and I'll go over that when it comes to gear. So I'm applying that. I quite like these nodes, just cold damage, increased damage with hits against frozen enemies, which is a pretty big multi, and also, not multi, but it is a lot of extra damage. And then this I find helpful for mapping when I'm just killing mobs that happen to be cold resist, but I don't want to go out of my way to apply cold exposure to them. These nodes appear I was messing around with for freeze buildup and a bit of extra cold damage, but I decided to opt out of them. The skill tree I've been constantly iterating on, like every 5 seconds, if you couldn't tell with my verbiage here. Like, a lot of this stuff is pretty much interchangeable. I literally just spec'd into this damage, and if I wanted to, if I was having survivability issues, I would just take the points out of the damage, and I would just go into more energy shield recharge rate. Or, if I was having a problem with mana, I would swap out of these points, and I would go into this to get more mana regeneration rate. Or if I wanted to increase my maximum energy shield, I could take points out of this and go into more maximum energy shield. There's some up here that I already grabbed. Some right there. You get the idea. I'll have skill trees down below for multiple variations. That'll probably be the only thing that I include in the description, because this is not a finite build literally at all at this point. I'm kind of just going over what I would recommend. So appreciate you guys listening to me yap. I am considering going Eldritch Battery at some point with this build, because if you're using the Everlasting Gaze, you will still retain some of your energy shield, but then a huge portion of it is going to be converted into mana, and converting into mana is very good if you happen to be using Archmage, because this is going to give you a crap ton of damage. Not only is it going to give you damage, it's also going to give you cast speed via Arcane Surge, and that's going to give you more mana regeneration rate as well, which is just huge damage-wise. Having that much flat mana is going to make it much easier to actually sustain mana while you're playing. However, the issue is that while I'm using the Everlasting Gaze, it is extremely hard to get up to 160 spirits, and you would need to scale more flat energy shield even more, and my gear is simply just not good enough to have enough energy shield while converting it, and only relying on the 30% from Everlasting Gaze to have enough energy shield. I think if I swapped, I'd have probably around 2,000 to 3,000 energy shield right now, which I don't think is enough to survive, but it would give me quite a lot of extra damage. The biggest problem is simply just getting up to 160 spirit in order to supplement Cast on Freeze and Archmage simultaneously, which would need a god tier chest, or I would have to swap out of Everlasting Gaze entirely, which is not viable if I wanted to do the Eldritch Battery setup. Right now I could swap out of this and I would lose about 2,000 energy shield, and then I could go for Archmage instead of using this amulet, and I would gain quite a lot of damage, but then mana is quite a bit of an issue. And I wouldn't be scaling as much flat mana if I had Eldritch Battery. So I'm still playing around with exactly how I want to have this set up. You could just go straight Frost, not use Cast on Freeze, only use Archmage as your spirit thing, and just try to scale up your mana and just get a little bit more energy shield, and then go Eldritch Battery, and then you don't have as much mana problems because you're not using Cast on Freeze Comet. That is a very viable and already working build, but I like the idea of having the freeze and the comet, so I'm still going to commit to this for a little bit, but if they nerf comet, then I'll swap it around and just go full lightning probably. These nodes up here are also pretty good, because it just is going to increase the damage of comet, but I like scaling the damage of both spark and comet simultaneously. I don't want to lose spark damage to scale comet, and I don't want to lose comet damage to scale spark currently. All right, let's talk about gear. So early on, when it comes to armor, like I said, I'd recommend getting maximum life and just getting straight up armor on your gear, and try to get as much resistance as possible. And then once you swap to energy shield, make sure that everything is an energy shield base. The most important thing is getting a chest with high energy shield, like plus to maximum and then percent energy shield. You want like 1 or 2 resistances on there, and then you want to add sockets and then add iron runes, so that increases the amount of energy shield. And then if you quality this, that makes the energy shield go up quite a lot. You can see that my energy shield is 6,180, but if I take off just 30 energy shield, it's going to go by 400, because you're scaling that energy shield percentage-wise. So getting as much flat ES on your gear as humanly possible is extremely important, and that is why I end up swapping to a focus. You want to use a wand and a focus ideally, because the focus has energy shield on it. What stats you want on this are basically just increased spell damage, level 2 lightning spell skills, and increased cast speed is very good for Spark. And one thing you'll notice that I have is gain percent of extra damage as lightning damage. The reason that I would say this is almost mandatory when using Call of the Brotherhood is that you lose access to shock when you are converting your damage to cold. But this is going to enable you to still retain access to shock for upwards of like 30% extra damage against high health mobs that you're going to shock regularly just by having this on your weapon. So that is extremely powerful. On your focus, you want as much energy shield as possible, and then scaling mana on either your weapon or your focus is going to be really good for you, because extra mana means you're scaling your Archmage if you had it, but your Arcane Focus, or Arcane Surge rather, for more mana. I have Everlasting Gaze, like I mentioned. I don't really know what an ideal normal amulet would be, but I might play around with it and try out Archmage for a little bit, but my mana will be kind of scuffed if I do so. For your ring, I'd recommend getting a Prismatic Ring, and you can get max mana on here and cast speed, and then just try to get any amount of resistances. As you can see, my gear's pretty crap. My gear is nothing insane, right? Helmet, try to get as much energy shield as possible. Mana, rarity to items found is pretty good, and int and fire and lightning res is pretty good. Int is nice because it just converts into more mana. And then we have gloves, mana, int, and resistances. Belt, try to get as much mana and resistance as possible. Boots, you want max movement speed. You can get a good amount of energy shield on here too. Mana, and then resistances as well. Comes to your ascendancy, the second that I stop recording this video, I'm going to go get my 6 point. Obviously, you want Arcane Surge because this is just going to give you cast speed and mana regeneration rate. And then for your last points, you could either go for Heart of the Storm for more survivability. I don't think it's necessary, but it does help a little bit, I guess. Or you could just go for Scouring Winds, which is just guaranteed a lot of extra damage because we are applying exposure via our Orb of Storms anyways with cold exposure. Alternative to Orb of Storms, you could also use Eye of Winter, but I didn't really like it. Orb of Storms just stays on the ground, so that is what I've been using. I think that about covers it. Hopefully none of that was too confusing. I kind of just wanted to explain where I'm at with the build and also give you guys an idea of how you can set it up based on where you're at and a lot of different ways that you can go about this. Obviously, I'm still iterating on it, so I don't have like all the answers right now, but I'm pretty sure I could take this version of it at least pretty high. Real quick, I'll just go over gameplay and how you want to play with my setup. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is I like having an offhand with Sigil of Power. You put this down and it basically just increases your damage based on how much mana you spend, and I spend quite a lot of mana, so we'll go Sigil of Power. Basically gives you just a massive increase of extra damage, up to 50% when you have 4 stacks of it. So that is pretty nice. If I find like an elite or something, I just put that down. When it comes to mapping here, I think my camera's going to die, but whatever. When it comes to mapping, most of the time I just tap my Spark. As you can see, everything just immediately gets frozen, and then the Comet will pretty much just finish it off, and the Spark itself does pretty good damage. If you just tap while moving, you won't reduce your movement speed all that much. You can still retain the majority of it, so you can just run around and kill stuff. I haven't played with a map that has burning ground on it. That might like mess up my energy shield a little bit. I don't know. But I pretty much just do this most of the time, and that is why I like having Comet. If I don't have Comet, my Spark doesn't do enough damage to just insta-kill stuff, in which case I would just put down my Mana Tempest and then do a couple casts and then keep going. So I would just walk ahead, boom, Mana Tempest, blah, blah, blah. If I find... Oh, I'm frozen. I need to get a charm that makes it to where I'm immune to freeze, because that happens to me all the time. If I find like an elite, I guess I'll just show you once I do find a rare. But in the meantime, if there's any millionaires in the chat, please let me know, because I lag like crazy when I'm recording on this game for whatever reason. So I basically just can't stream it. I don't really know why. My computer's decent, but nonetheless, I think I need to get a better one because apparently I can't sustain for this game. Okay, so you can see that that elite nearly got one-shotted by just all those comets being around him. But normally, if I find an elite, I'll do what I like to call the Wombo combo on him, where I will put down my Sigil of Power. So pretend that I just put down my Sigil of Power, because I'll just wait for the cooldown. So I'll put down Sigil of Power. I will put down Flame Wall, Orb of Storms for the exposure, and then I'll do Mana Tempest, and then I'll just start spamming. I'll also do that if I ever find like a ritual, or if I find, or even an expedition, or anything that just like spawns monsters. You can preemptively do that combo to have a million sparks on the ground. So the second that you even just activate it, everything just gets instantaneously frozen. That is why I quite like having Spark, because especially with duration, Spark lasts crazy long. So everything is just going to get perpetually frozen. So you just have a crazy defensive layer, but because you're freezing everything, you're spawning a million comets. It might be possible that scaling more freeze buildup is good. I don't know if that would result in you casting more comets if you can like refreeze an enemy. I don't entirely know how that mechanic works. Also, if I ever find a mob, like if I'm ever in danger, I will put down frost walls, and this helps a lot because the mobs will get stuck on it. That is also another thing that I'd recommend if you're having any issues getting like surrounded by monsters or anything like that. I need a little bit more movement speed. I'm looking to get better boots. I'm looking to get better gear everywhere. Like I could have literally triple the amount of energy shield by just having higher bases. But yeah, you can see that my mana is pretty rough, and that's because Comet costs a crap ton of mana. But there's a lot of nodes in the skill tree that I currently don't have that would increase my mana. And keep in mind that as you scale your maximum mana, you're also scaling your mana regeneration rate. So if I had better gear and I had a 60 spirit chest, I would get more energy shield, and then I could use Eldritch Battery to then convert all that energy shield into more mana. And then I would still retain a lot of the energy shield via having Everlasting Gaze, so I could probably have enough energy shield to where I'm not dying. And then I'd have a crap ton of mana, which would then give me more spell damage via Archmage and one of our skill tree points. I guess that's an elite right there. So I'll do a little bit of wombo combo action on him. Dead. Oh, T9. Nice. Do a little wombo combo on this guy. He's frozen, so he just can't do anything. I guess my mana tempest didn't go down, so I'm doing no damage. Okay, he's dead. There we go. But you can see the vision, right, with what I'm trying to do. The problem is I need like all the gear to make it work, so I almost can't recommend it. But you could just do all of what I'm saying with just pure shock and just ditch cast on freeze. But I mean, everything being frozen is just so nice. You can see that my energy shield recharge is not anything crazy. It does take a second, like it's literally a second and a half. But I'm not having survivability issues in these maps. If I was having survivability issues, then sure, I would scale my recharge rate a little bit more. I would just spec out of some damage and just go into some recharge rate, and that would be perfectly fine. Anyways, let me know your guys' thoughts down below, and if there's any Giga Chad big brains out there that have an idea of what I should do with this build to make it a little bit better, I am all ears. There's a lot of interactions and stuff that I don't know with this game right now, because I'm brand new to PoE. So there's probably something obvious that I'm not doing that I could be doing to make this a lot better. But when it comes to like T8, T9, T10 maps right now, I would say I'm pretty happy with this. Survivability is not an issue at all. I could probably lose a lot of maximum ES and be perfectly fine. And I'm even considering dropping my amulet right now and getting some more spirit just so I could go Archmage for the time being. But that's very temporary, and I almost don't have the mana to sustain that. Anyways, hopefully you found the video helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments, and I will be posting updated versions of this build, so be on the lookout for that. But I am extremely happy with this for right now, and I'm having a lot of fun playing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace! Oh, if you have any exalts, if there's any millionaires that want to give me some exalts, let me know. My name is just Nick2 in game, so thank you very much. All right, peace.